Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you, Andrea, for leading us in prayer. You prayed for the preaching team. We need it. I'm going to pray again now. Father God, I'm so aware that we're all coming from different places this morning. What's going on in our lives? What things we actually believe? Your word, though, is powerful. Powerful to say, powerful to change. And so I pray that in a number of ways you would be working, even if we don't know what those ways are. Lord, I pray that you would have mercy on us, speak to us, encourage us, lead us on. And Lord, may Jesus have all the honour in our lives and hearts this morning. Amen. I need these. Well, this morning, it's particularly good, this sermon, for those of us who wear glasses. It's not normally an advantage in life, but this morning, it is. I can't quite remember how old I was, probably about 12, when I came out of the opticians with my first pair of glasses. It was in Rains Park. We got into the car, and I remember taking them on and being astonished. I had no idea how little I could see before, but suddenly everything was clear. Becoming a Christian is a little bit like that. When I was older, maybe 17, 18, I had a brief stint with reaction glasses. Do you know those? They're the glasses that when you go into a room, they're clear, in theory, and then when you go into the sunlight, they go dark. There was a brief stint, because they're really annoying. Why am I talking about glasses? Well, because glasses are a wonderful picture of what this chapter in Athens, in Acts, in Athens, is all about. About how we all see the world a bit differently. The proper term for this is worldview, how each of us views the world. And each one of us, we've got our own experiences, our beliefs, which make up how we see and make sense of everything. Like glasses that are tinted, as we look through them, everything is coloured. But then also like glasses, as any glasses wearer will tell you, you forget they're there most of the time. And so it is with our world views. And so it was with Paul in Athens. He's walking around with his Christian glasses on. And the Athenians are going around with their pagan, Greek god glasses on. And then more specifically, there are these groups. There's the Epicureans, these philosophers. And to greatly simplify what they believe, they're all about kind of a distant, irrelevant God, and so pleasure is the meaning of life. The Stoics then have another pair of glasses. For them, God was kind of in everything, kind of in the universe, made up of God. And so for them, I don't quite know how these two things link, but life was about emotional detachment, whether from pleasure or from pain. That's where the word Stoic comes from. And the point is that as Paul was walking around, when he went to a synagogue, people, they had similar glasses. Preaching to Jews about Jesus. Their beliefs about God were pretty similar. But here now, as he's walking around, he's in a hodgepodge of wildly different beliefs, ideas, different values. And in a way, it's much like we are today. I'm hugely aware that even as I preach now, we have different glasses amongst us. Some of us are wearing Christian glasses, come to this passage. Some of us, it's different glasses. We see it in politics. Something happens and some celebrate, some despair. Different glasses. And actually, talking about Christianity in our society, it used to be that, people had generally Christian glasses, a general Bible knowledge. And yet, actually today, as people come to Christ, they're starting a lot further back. And so I hope that this chapter in Athens, as we see Paul in the mismatch of glasses, it might speak to us, both as we continue to think about sharing our faith in the world we live in, but also just as people who perhaps need to hear Paul's words for ourselves. Well, we're going to spend our time doing two things. We're going to briefly look at Paul's motivation, how he needed to have his Christian glasses firmly on his face. But then also we're going to focus on his message, how he bridges the gap, the glasses gap. So first, motivation. And I don't feel particularly sorry for Paul, if I'm honest, at this point, finding himself alone waiting for his colleagues, but of all places in the world, Athens. The world-famous Athens. It was an impressive city. What would you do if you were stuck there for a few days? I imagine he could have gone round ticking off the sites, the monuments. You know, the Parthenon. Not in ruins like if you visited it today, but in all its glory. Strolling around the marketplace, hearing the kind of world-famous debates. Going to see a show. And he did look around. But unlike the wide-eyed tourist, Paul was not impressed. So, verse 16. Hope you've got your Bibles open. Verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed. Why? To see that the city was full of idols. And to be fair, it was full of idols. A geographer who went there called Pausanias, a little bit later, he said that it's easier to meet a god or goddess on the main street than a person. Which actually was true. Idols apparently outnumbered people 3-1. But he was not impressed. Actually, he was greatly distressed. The word there is a strong word, a strong emotion. Because as he looked not through worldly glasses, but his Christian glasses were clear. He looked and he saw with the eyes of faith. And so his heart burned. It burned with jealousy for God, with zeal for God's glory. I think also, though, with sadness. I was struck by one sentence I read this week. A guy called Kent Hughes writing, he said, every idol demonstrated the Athenians' hunger for God, but it also testified to their spiritual emptiness, which is sad. He saw clearly, he felt strongly, and so he acted decisively. Verse 17, he reasoned on Sabbaths with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks in the synagogue. The rest of the week he spent his time not as a tourist, but going to the marketplace, speaking to anyone he can find, debating with these philosophers. He longed that they might find the true God in all their searching. And it makes me wonder, why don't I long like that, like Paul? You might ask the same. Well, if Paul saw and then felt and then did, perhaps the answer is that we don't do with the zeal of Paul because we don't feel so strongly. And perhaps when our hearts don't burn like Paul's, it's because our eyes don't see clearly. I love this biography of the American evangelist D.L. Moody. He was around in the 19th century. He was used greatly by God to bring people to Jesus. And there's this moment when he's in England and 3 British vicars come to see him. They want to know why this uneducated American is connecting so well with people. And so Moody took them to the window and he asked, what do you see? And they looked out at this park and they described some of the things they see. And then they asked him, what do you see? And with tears going down his face, he talked about how he saw countless souls who need saving. Because he could see clearly and he felt strongly. And so he did. But my glasses, they're not clear. I walk around with worldly glasses and I see people who look fine, look like they're having a happy life. They don't need anything, do they? But I need to slow down. I've got these cleaning wipes for my glasses on my desk. My glasses need cleaning. My spiritual glasses, that I might see clearly, feel strongly, and have the zeal like Paul's. But what I want to spend most of our time on this morning is not actually Paul's motivation, but what Paul then did, what he said, his message to these Athenians. And here it's kind of the reverse. It's not about having clear Christian glasses, although it is that, but it's also, as it were, taking the other glasses, putting them on for a little bit, and seeing and understanding life through others' eyes. Because that is what Paul demonstrates so well for us in these verses. So let's pick up the story. He's debating with these philosophers, verse 18. They call him a babbler. The Greek word there is actually seed picker, like just a bird picking at kind of other people's ideas. In Athens, that's a big insult. Di and Colin were telling me over the road that in South Africa there's a bird called the babbler. And kind of just chats away, kind of picks at things. So they're insulting him, but, the Athenians, they love the latest ideas. They love to hear it, discuss it, so they want to hear more of Paul. So they take him to the Areopagus. This is where the council meet. People call it Mars Hill, because that's where the god Ares, or Mars in Roman, had his temple. And it was where the leaders were. So this was, what an opportunity for the leaders, the great and the good, to hear the message of Jesus, though a daunting one, with the great temples shadowing over. So what's he going to say? He can't just jump straight in with Jesus, with sin. He won't understand. That won't make any sense. So he has to lay some groundwork. Let's briefly go through his message. It's an abbreviation. He would have said more than this, but this is a summary of what he said. And let's see how he makes that connection. He begins, verse 22, by building a bridge to their glasses from his. Let's have a look down. Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. And he starts complimentary to get them on board. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, he's trying to make this point of connection. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. You see, he's not making them come to him, he's going to them. Now, what you worship as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. So he's building this bridge, and now he's going to kind of go on and put some spiritual doses of spiritual truth. Try and expose some of the flaws in what they believe and they don't even think about. It's not this, but this. So, first, not limited. God's not limited, but he's creator. So verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. So you can't put God in a box. Limit him to a building or a day of the week. It's absurd. He made everything. Then verse 25, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. He's not dependent on us, but because rather he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. It's the other way around. We're dependent on him. He sustains us. Verse 26, from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men, people, would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. He is not the God of the Stoics, part of everything. He's the one who made everything. He is not the irrelevant, distant God of the Epicureans. He is the detailed ruler of everything, of nations. He is the intimate one that we can know. He's undermining all these little things they believe. And then he keeps going. Verse 28, at this point, you'll get this in my sermons as well. You get to a point where you think people are getting a bit bored, so you need to throw in something to connect them. He throws in two poets, Greek poets, verse 28. For in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said. We are his offspring. You can imagine he's looking at maybe a statue of Zeus. And Greeks claim themselves, in their own poets, to be offspring of this statue. But that's kind of absurd. It's a statue, as he goes on. Verse 29. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. God is not less than man, a lifestyle option for us to pick off the shelf if we want to, as we see fit. He's the Father, the source of life for all mankind. And as such, finally, verse 31, and here's where he gets to Jesus. He is the judge. Verse 31, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. That's Jesus. He has given proof to this to all people by raising Jesus from the dead. So he gets to Jesus and the gospel. Again, it's an abbreviation. But he has to lay the groundwork. He can't talk about God because they'll hear something different. So he talks about how he's the creator, the sustainer, the ruler, the father. He's unpicking what they think and they hear when they hear the word God. I mean, it's always interesting, isn't it, to ask someone, well, what do you imagine God is like? Because I imagine their description is nothing like what I believe God is like from the Bible. I don't believe that God either. We need to understand what they think so that we can be talking on the same page and not just babbling at one another. Now, at this point, you might think, well, that's all well and good. And frankly, if tomorrow I walk into someone's house and they have an idol to an unknown God, I will know what to say. You can tell them about the God that we do know. But, that's unlikely. What do we actually do? How do we, if we're Christians here, practically put on other people's glasses and see the world through their eyes for a bit? Because frankly, it'd be easy to come to a passage like this and then to leave being like, well, good, but we need to be a professional to do something like that. I saw a Facebook post from Glenn Scrivener, who does the 3-1 course. We've done that here recently. Yesterday, he was kind of encouraging people to evangelism, and he was at the same time managing to raise expectations and yet lower the bar, which is quite an achievement. I feel like today I could be raising expectations and raising the bar. What he said was, anyone who knows John 3:16 is actually ready to share the gospel. In fact, anyone who has any story at all of Christian faith is ready to share the gospel. But I'd hate for you to leave this morning thinking, well, actually sharing faith is harder than it was when I arrived because of this passage. So I want to encourage you that what Paul's doing here is he's really just noticing. And actually I think we can all notice things. And I'm going to suggest a framework, which I realised talking to people after the first service didn't necessarily make things clearer, but we're going to go with it anyway. And maybe there'll be something in this that helps. And it comes from a book by a guy called Dan Strange from a few years ago called Making Faith Magnetic. And it's based on the work of a guy called J.H. Bavinck. He was around 100 years ago. He was a missionary, I think, to Indonesia. And he saw different cultures. He studied peoples. And he noticed that in all the cultures that he saw, well, that these different kind of feelings would bubble to the surface, would be there in the background. He called them magnetic points, feelings that are really kind of religious feelings. And I mention this to you because I particularly think it fits in with our passage today. So have a look down it again, Acts 17, verse 22. How does Paul begin? I see that in every way you are very religious. And I think that even our most anti-religious friends are actually quite religious. They have beliefs, they have values. But also I think that they're religious because of verse 27. So over the page, verse 27, God ordains the nations and the times of nations. Why? God did this so that people would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So that last phrase, God is not far from anyone. We saw this a few weeks ago on the Alpha course. People were really struck by this image. I've got it up on the screen. It's from St. Paul's Cathedral, and they took the cameras to St. Paul's Cathedral to see it. It's not on the screen because I didn't put it on the screen. Well, I'll describe it to you. It's in St. Paul's Cathedral. You can go and see it there instead. It's a painting of Jesus, and he's at a door. And it's based on the words from Revelation 3, verse 20, which says, "Here I am," it's the words of Jesus, "I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in." And in the Alpha video, it's pointed out that there's no door handle on Jesus' side, because he's not going to barge his way in to our lives, but he's waiting, he's nearby for us. And so too, God has set up our lives in this world that he is not actually far from us, from people. Or to put it in the words of Ecclesiastes, he's set eternity in people's hearts. And in Romans 1, Paul says that we, subconsciously or not, we push down these God feelings, but they kind of pop up again. It's a bit like whack-a-mole, you push one down, another one pops up. Like these magnetic points, that's what these are. These little places that, with non-Christian glasses on, they're just things. But with Christian glasses on, we notice that they're God things, and we can connect with them. So I offered this idea to you. I now realise that it's not going to appear on the screen. So you might have to Google it later. Magnetic points. There are 5 of them. And we're not going to go through them all because we just don't have the time. But maybe some of these things will help some of us notice ways in which there's actually this hunger in people for God. Paul was probably tapping into the 5th. Can't see them listed, but the 5th one is the sense of some sort of higher power. The Athenians had this sense. They were searching for an unknown God. There's one of them called Norm, which is about, are there standards for living? The fact that people have human rights, that you can say, yes, that thing that person's doing is wrong, objectively. How does that point to God? There's this idea of deliverance, that each of us have a hunger for things to be better, for a way out from our broken world, whether that's through pleasure and distraction, or whether that's through, a political movement. There's this idea of destiny. This one's really interesting. The idea that we want control, that there is control going on. People say on a game show, in a reality show, "Oh, I really felt like I'm meant to be here," which is a really odd thing for someone who doesn't believe in God to say. But people say that, and I think they believe that. Apparently there's this thing in hospitals and police stations and call centres where you're not allowed to say, it's forbidden to say the word quiet. It's quiet tonight. You can't say that because you might tempt fate. And people have written scientific studies on this, even though they don't believe in a God. It's kind of those whack-a-mole popping up to the surface for us to notice. But let me just focus on the first one, mostly because it has the most confusing name, which is totality, but also because it's one of my favourites. And this is the idea that we have a hunger to be part of something greater than ourselves. I once wrote something about this on the experience of going to a secret cinema event. Has anyone ever heard of secret cinema? It's this thing where you dress up and you go to like a secret location with lots of other people to be immersed in the world of a film. So this was Casino Royale, James Bond, and you had to dress up and, a bit like James Bond and go to this thing. And there was all sorts of stuff going on in the Casino Royale kind of world, and you're part of it. And you watch the film and they act bits out, and it's kind of really amazing. There's something wonderful of being part of something bigger, like when you're at a concert or when you're at a sports match. But then right afterwards, those euphoric highs, the next morning become kind of depressing lows. I saw a Facebook reel just yesterday that reminded me of this. It was someone who was in a show, a musical, dancing, and it was like that feeling of that then becomes, and then just the gloom of sitting alone in a room the next day. A few years ago, we had a weekend away that was on thinking about heaven and eternity. And I spoke about this to them. On the last day I said, When you get home, you're going to have this kind of post-weekend away blues. It just happens to all of us, doesn't it? Because you've been part of something bigger than yourself, but now you're going to crash back down into normality. And it's good to be aware of that. And that's an okay thing, because it's not just a thing, it's a God thing. God has made us for more. He's made us for bigger. He's made us for eternity with others. And when we feel like that, we can let it turn our hearts in hope toward the day when that longing will be fulfilled. Now, maybe I've just complicated it all the more, even with the things not on the screen. But I guess it's like that quote that we had earlier. Every idol demonstrated the Athenians' hunger for God, but it also testified to their spiritual emptiness. Are there things that we can notice? A hunger that's ultimately a hunger for God, that also testify to the emptiness when you search for those things in other things. Well, we've run out of time. Let's end very briefly on the final paragraph, because there are, did it work? This is all pointless if it's, not effective. Well, we need to be realistic. So 3 responses to Paul in verse 32. First, and which is yours, by the way? Which is your response to Paul's words? The first response is mockery. They cut him off when he started to talk about the resurrection. Greeks had no place for the resurrection. How ridiculous, they sneered. But it shouldn't be a surprise. Different glasses. And then the second, verse 32, there's delay. Others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. It's all very interesting. I'd be interested to hear a bit more. But, there's no rush. Because ultimately it's trivial. Doesn't really matter. Someone was telling me after the first service of how they have different glasses for different things, and sometimes they can put on the blurry ones. It's blurry glasses. They see a bit, but it can take a long, long time for people to see clearly. But we mustn't delay. Get into that place of saying, yes, I decide to follow Jesus. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me, as that song goes. And then thirdly, verse 34, some believed. And it's so easy to just rush over this verse, but it is a miracle. It is new glasses. And among them there were 2. There was Dionysius and there was Damaris, a woman. And we know nothing about these 2. But when they went home that day, they were new people, new glasses. They saw things differently, clearly. This is a glorious thing. We will get to meet these 2 in heaven. And it's because of Paul and his glasses. It's because of the grace of God. But he used Paul and his glasses. Paul's motive from seeing through his Christian glasses clearly. His heart burns. But he also noticed the different glasses. He made the work. He made those connections between the 2. And so may it be for us this Christmas. For you, for me, for us as a church, as we invite people in over the Christmas season, as we go into the A Passion for Life mission in February, God is not far from anyone. Might he use us individually as a church to bring people to Christ.